Every gardener eventually comes face to face with the same problem. The body can't always keep up with the demands of the soil. Shovels, hoes, and pickaxes dig deep, but they also strain muscles, wear down joints, and turn the joy of gardening into a chore of pain. Many people even give up growing because the bending, lifting, and prying become too much. But there are two simple tools that turn the tables. Tools that replace the back-breaking weight of traditional gear while still delivering all the power and efficiency needed to build, plant, and maintain a thriving garden. By trading the heavy equipment for these lighter, smarter designs, soil still gets worked, weeds still get managed, and beds still get refreshed, without wrecking your back in the process. The first tool replaces the shovel for everyday digging. The traditional shovel is versatile but brutal on the body. It demands a strong lower back for prying, a good grip for leverage, and steady knees for repeated bending. The alternative is a broad fork, sometimes called a U-fork or grelinette. Unlike a shovel, it doesn't lift heavy chunks of soil. Instead, it uses body weight and leverage to loosen the ground in place. Two handles extend from a horizontal bar with steel tines that sink into the soil. By stepping on the bar and rocking back, the soil fractures and aerates without being flipped. The difference is immediate. Instead of lifting 20 or 30 pounds of earth with each shovelful, the broad fork relies on body weight to do the work. This saves the lower back while still opening the soil deeply enough for roots to explore. In compacted clay beds, 2 passes with the broad fork are usually enough to restore airflow and water movement, while the soil's natural layers stay intact. This is important because flipping soil with a shovel disrupts microbial life, burying oxygen-loving organisms and exposing deeper organisms to conditions they can't survive. The broad fork loosens without overturning, so microbes remain balanced while roots find room to grow. So, practical use is straightforward. In a 4-foot wide bed, you just place the broad fork at one end, step on the bar until the tines sink fully, and then pull back on the handles until the soil lifts slightly. Then, you move back one step and repeat across the width. For an average 10-foot bed, it takes only 5 to 6 insertions, which is far faster and honestly way less taxing than doing dozens of shovel loads. For sandy soils, a single pass each spring keeps the ground nice and loose. For heavier clay soils, a fall and spring pass may be needed to gradually build structure. The second tool handles weeds without the bending. You know, weeding is where most gardeners lose both patience and posture. Hours of crouching, kneeling, or stooping can undo a season of work with pulled muscles or aching joints. The tool that changes this is the stirrup hoe, also called an oscillating hoe. Unlike the rigid chopping hoes of old, the stirrup hoe uses a thin, sharp blade set in a loop that rocks back and forth just under the soil surface. The motion is light, gliding rather than striking, and it severs weeds at the root crown with almost no effort. The advantage is not just efficiency, but posture. The long handle keeps the gardener standing upright, moving with small pushes and pulls rather than swinging down or bending over. In a 20-foot row, a single pass with the stirrup hoe can clear thousands of tiny weed seedlings in just a few minutes. Because the blade only skims the top inch of soil, it doesn't bring new weed seeds to the surface the way deeper cultivation does. Used weekly, it prevents weeds from ever establishing, which means, fewer battles later in the season. For practical ratios, think of it as 1 pass per week during peak germination periods in spring and early summer. Each pass takes only seconds per row, and by keeping ahead of the weeds, larger crops never face competition for water or nutrients. In mulched beds, the stirrup hoe works well at the edges and between plants where mulch is thinner, extending the weed-free zone without disturbing the protective cover. The broad fork and the stirrup hoe complement each other perfectly. The broad fork prepares the soil at the start of the season, opening it without back-breaking labor. Once crops are in place, the stirrup hoe maintains the bed by knocking out weeds while standing tall. Together, they replace the shovel, pick, and hand weeder that demand so much bending and lifting. In a typical season, the cycle might look like this. In early spring, broad fork the beds to loosen and aerate. Add compost on top without mixing, letting rainfall and worms draw nutrients down. Plant your crops, then monitor for weeds. As soon as green threads appear, just run the stirrup hoe lightly through the row. So, if you repeat this weekly for the first 6 weeks, the weed seed bank really starts to weaken. By the middle of the season, your crops have enough canopy to shade out most new weeds, and honestly, the workload drops off dramatically. What's really striking is that this method doesn't just protect your back, it actually builds better soil structure too. The broad fork encourages deep root growth and stronger microbial life by preserving those natural layers, and the stirrup hoe prevents the soil from being turned excessively, which keeps organic matter concentrated right at the top, where it can feed worms and fungi. Over time, the soil just gets softer, more fertile, and a whole lot easier to manage, meaning even less effort is needed in future years. For the gardener, the benefits are pretty obvious. Instead of spending hours in those strained positions, the work becomes light, rhythmic, and upright. A lot of older gardeners or folks with injuries find they can actually continue growing food much longer once they switch to these tools. In raised beds, the broad fork is narrow enough to fit within 4-foot widths, and just one pass can prepare the entire bed without ever needing to climb inside. In large open field gardens, you can use wider broad fork models, and the stirrup hoe really shines in those long rows where efficiency matters most. In perennial gardens or orchards, the stirrup hoe keeps paths and understories clean with minimal disturbance, while the broad fork can be used every few years to rejuvenate the soil around tree rows. Even container gardeners can adapt the principle by using smaller handheld versions of these tools. A mini broad fork designed for tight spaces loosens planter boxes without digging, and a small oscillating hoe works across balcony beds just as effectively. The principle remains the same: loosen deeply without lifting, and weed lightly without bending. Heavy tools have their place in construction, but in the garden they often do more harm than good. By switching to the broad fork and the stirrup hoe, the backbreaking side of gardening disappears while soil health improves. These two gadgets are simple, durable, and widely available, yet they completely change the way a garden is managed. They let the gardener work with the soil instead of against it, using body weight and rhythm instead of brute force. If you've ever felt worn down by the shovel or tired of crouching to pull weeds, it's time to make the switch. Try these two tools for a season and notice how much easier and more enjoyable your garden becomes. You'll not only save your back but also gain healthier soil and more productive plants. For more gardening methods that reduce labor and increase harvests, subscribe to Hydrohaven and share this video with other growers. Together we can spread the tools and techniques that keep us gardening for years without breaking down our bodies in the process.